This video is sponsored by Gamos Metal Cruise 2023.
Amassing the bodies and pits as they die, sentient and filthy they rot. Flammable and singing, discarded like waste. For the fire of the handgun, you played it all wrong. And soul and valor.
Welcome to Rauta. One of the most anticipated black metal albums is here. It's the 15th album by the Swedish long-timer veterans of black metal scene, Marduk. This one is Memento Mori. As it just happens, the very same thing I tattooed. I even made a joke at the festivals. I took the tattoo after Marduk released their albums. Now, jokes aside, this is a long anticipated album. I mean, this is the longest period of Marduk without any albums so far. Taking a look at their discography back in the days, I mean, typically Marduk albums takes roughly 2 years to be released. That is, every album there is a 1 to 3 years gap between different albums, and now 5 years. Victoria came out already 2018. It feels like just 2 years ago, but so the time flies, and it seems like, contrary to the other bands out there, the so-called COVID years didn't exactly speed up things in the Marduk department. Why so? One can only guess, but these have been interesting times. Like recently, Marduk bass player got booted from the bands for various reasons, and of course Marduk, much like other bands, were on hiatus when COVID was here. However, after that they have been very active back on the road, also making kick-ass concerts and all that stuff. Been witnessing them live also myself, and yeah, it seems like Marduk machine never gets old, never wears down. It's one of those bands that you just keep amazed by. I mean, like, how come after more than 30 years in the making, they just keep making intense music without having those moments like, okay, this is going to fall apart and maybe they should quit and all that stuff. Now, be it as may, here we are talking about Memento Mori. 41 minutes, almost 42 minutes of black metal in very, very fierce ways. Now, this album is out on 1st of September 2023. I was lucky enough to get this physical copy a couple of weeks before, so I have had a little bit time to listen to it, feel the beautiful packaging and all. Now, before we get to the actual music, one more word about this packaging is that, in my opinion, this is the most beautiful Marduk CD digipack released since Sponsor Division Marduk. I have my own copy on the shelf where it has this big metallic shield on the top of that. This doesn't really beat that, but like I showed you, this is really, really cool packaging, and I think bands like this totally deserve something beyond typical jewel cases, even though of course there are lots of people who just prefer the typical jewel cases. So thank you to the label for sending me this one. This is something that I really feel like I'm going back to, because first of all, this album is good. I mean, beyond good. It's great. And secondly, this kind of packaging always kind of emphasizes, reminds me how important physical products are versus whatever you have on streaming services and whatnot. So here we are with this album covering 10 tracks. And I had to actually go back to Victoria to get a little bit of reminding myself how different after all these albums are, because my first initial spin with Memento Mori was much like, yeah, this is pretty much the basic Marduk, both good and bad, nothing out of ordinary, not surprising and all that stuff. Partly I was correct. Partly this is exactly what you would expect from Marduk. Marduk, which is the kind of a black metal equivalent to Cannibal Corpse in the sense that both albums tour all the time, both albums put out quality albums all the time, every couple of years basically, and nothing really changes. So what you expect from a Marduk, or Cannibal Corpse for that matter, is basically what you get. And this is usually not a letdown, but a positive surprise nonetheless. But actually, when I was comparing this to Victoria, I kind of got reminded of a couple of things. Where Victoria is some 33 minutes and basically very basic Marduk. Both good and bad, I would say, once again. Memento Mori is more multifaceted. I mean, it's more variety in the sense of having those kind of a mid-tempo songs, almost slow parts. For example, the last track, As We Are, and also those really fierce ones, which are more akin to Panzer Division Marduk from 1999. Now, these fast parts are my favorite ones, not because in general I am not the biggest fan of just fast-paced black metal, but when it's done right, it's just the best thing what black metal has to offer. Well, next to Dark Throne anyway. But for example, on this album you have Blood of the Funeral, the third track, which sounds with the shoveling samples in the beginning, which might really confuse you with the fourth track where shovel is actually mentioned. And then songs like Red Tree of Blood, since the blood is the gold metal standard here, is also one of those fierce tracks. It's not so far away from, Panzer Division Marduk, or if you compare it to different bands like Tudor, for example, from Norway, which also did an album with a very similar approach to black metal. Very fierce, very energetic, sinister, and no apologies whatsoever. So when there are lots of bands that kind of want to hold back and want to create certain kind of a contrast and all that stuff, well, Marduk is not exactly one of those bands. I mean, for example, compared to Vatine, they might have faster parts, but they're also kind of a very atmospheric at given times. Whereas Marduk is more like the machine gun that just never goes out of ammo unless, that is, you consider the end of the album being like that. But for example, this album has a couple of moments when things really slow down. At some parts it's more like ambience, like around the first quarter of or first third actually on the album there are the spoken parts with lots of reverb, where Mortus keep saying those really honest lines or words. It's kind of like, let's slow down before we just start, the machine gun fire once again. And also like the last track, for example, is a slow tempo track. And in my opinion, it isn't that good of a track compared to most of the tracks on this album, but it creates this important contrast versus the faster parts. And then you kind of note that this is the band that is able to do much more than just those machine gun fire type of songs, which is like Gatling gun shredding houses and buildings and cars and whatever to pieces, not to mention items of flesh. But Marduk is able to showcase that despite being more than 30 years in the business, 30 years in the scene, they are relentless, unapologetic, fast, fierce, aggressive, and also certain ways kind of a dark. Now, Memento Mori means really, literally, the Latin phrase, why I have it tattooed on myself as well. I mean, it's a classic saying which basically say, remember that you are mortal. Remember that you will die. And back in the days, that was kind of a greeting. So it's not necessarily that grim or dark saying as you might think of it. Like, okay, remember that you're going to die. It's more like, hello there, right there. Remember that you're going to die, make death, you're going to die someday. And as such, it's kind of like the saying, seize the moment, seize the day, make your life something more important. So in that respect, this kind of gives this gray shadow on the top of the album feel. Instead of seeing it grim, I mean, I come from the background where I just enjoy these 1800 German philosophers, which are sometimes seen very, very pessimistic and all that stuff, where I see them just being realistic. We're gonna die, and some of the things we do won't matter shit. Most of the things that won't matter shit. So it's all about seizing the moment, seizing the day. One could even see it in a positive light, like, whatever you're gonna do, I mean, make sure that it matters to you anyway, even if the rest of the world doesn't give a flying F. My point here is, this is the kind of a stuff that resonates strongly with the middle-aged people. So while you think like it's it's reminding you about death and things are very grim in that department, it's also like, yeah, we're about to die someday and maybe Marduk won't be there for yet another 30 years. I mean, it's not very likely when people are around their 50s. Now imagine adding some 30 years into that. That doesn't, however, mean that Marduk is going somewhere out of black metal. In my opinion, it's more like a mature version of black metal. For some people, it might not lack the passion of the teenagers, the youngster who are crazy enough to do all kinds of stuff because they are immortal after all. But once you get like older, you start to realize certain things and things are put into different perspective. And I think in that sense, Marduk does perfect job, making that a more mature take on black metal into something artistic known as black metal. So it's at the same time kind of a very thinking man's black metal, and it's very adult black metal, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have the energy. Quite the contrary, some of these songs are just crazy fast and they're crazy energetic, and it's more like proving to some of the younger kids you don't necessarily go slow and all that stuff with age. And in my opinion, Memento Mori is one of the better albums by Marduk. It's not the most innovative out there, but it has these contrast parts. It has these different elements that totally showcase what Marduk really can be if they choose it to be that way. Then again, it's not pure Panzer Division Marduk Part 2 either, because it's not just fast parts all the way down. In my opinion, it is indeed, for these reasons, one of the better Marduk albums out there. And on top of that, I think Mortu's really nailed with the vocals here. They are really fierce. They're almost like bestial. They're not exactly growly, but they're far from those high-pitchy teenage screams what you can hear on many albums in the 90s when the guys were like, well, teenagers basically, and screaming their lungs out, only to find out that later on they're not able to do that. But personally, I prefer these rather raspy, throaty vocals which are present here, and I think Mortu's does a wonderful job with that. Now, my only tiny little complaint is the overall sound could be a little bit more powerful. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but it's not great. And my point here is, while the drums sound powerful, the bass is there more than enough, and the vocals are great, guitar sounds could be better. And that's kind of a shame because, in my opinion, Marduk has always operated more or less around the guitar, the riffs and the fastness and all that stuff. But like I said, it's not bad by no means, not even mediocrity. It's good. It just could be great. However, all in all, I would say this is one of the best black metal albums of the year. So my final score would be 8.5 out of 10. Closer to, in a way, 9 than 8. But then again, I also think that this doesn't really beat Panzer Division Marduk, which is my favorite black metal album from Marduk. And if you feel like you're different, maybe you could actually like this one more. Now check it out. This is out on the 1st of September 2023. So what are you waiting for? Check out the single songs, and when you have the possibility, go for the full album. Rauta recommends. Thank you for watching this video. Bye bye.